proud to be a part of Tilak College of Science and Commerce, which has organized this one-week online FTP, Quality in Higher Education, and NEP 2020 under the guidance of IQAC and FDP Committee in collaboration with Guru Angad Dev Teaching Learning Center. In the beginning itself, I would like to express my sincere respect and gratitude to our Honorable Chairman, Sri Jain Kurup Sir, and Directors Dr. Ajit Kurup Sir and Dr. Arun Kurup Sir for providing us this platform to organize this program. The guest speaker of our today's first session is Dr. Rajendra Kumar Joshi Sir, who is the Senior Consultant, Center for Educational and Social Studies, Bangalore. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Rajendra Kumar Sir. So I will be giving a brief introduction about Rajendra Kumar Sir regarding Sir's educational qualifications. He got a PhD from Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Mumbai in 1990. Also MA in Philosophy from Bangalore University. Regarding Sir's work experience, Director, Learning and Development, Marwadi University, Rajkot, Gujarat. Head Mission 10X Research Center, Wipro Technologies. Director, Indus Training and Research Institute of Indus International School, Bangalore. Dean, Education Studies at International Academy for Creative Teaching at Jain Group of Institutions, Bangalore. Vice Principal, SP Chowgule College, Margo, Goa. Lecturer and reader in philosophy between the years 1987 to 2004 at SP Chowgule College, Margao. Taught at the Valley School run by J. Krishnamurti Foundation during the year 1982 to 83. Sir's other related experiences worked closely with NAC, both as peer team member and coordinator of the peer team to assess and accredit colleges in the states of Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu. Also, Sir got an award, Emerald, and the AIMA, that is All India Management Association Research Fund Award for a research project, along with the 3 others for a research project, namely Building Grassroots Leadership in the Public Schooling System in Karnataka. Now, I request Rajendra Kumar Sir to guide us by starting your session on innovative pedagogy. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I would like to share my screen. Is it okay? I mean, does it allow?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, fine. Let me try and do that. Oh. Can you see the screen?
No, sir.
No, sir. Not yet.
Oh my goodness. Problem then. Do I do it? Problem then. Okay, fine. 1 minute. I'll do it in a minute. No. Now, is it visible?
Yes, sir. It is visible.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So, good afternoon, everybody. This is a session on pedagogy, innovative pedagogy. The way I would like to go about is we will look at pedagogy in a little larger context and also then come to some aspects of what does it mean to be an innovative pedagogy and some examples of innovative pedagogy. The context for this one is, of course.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, you
Yeah.
need to double click on PPT. Yeah, PPT is not visible. Your entire screen is visible. You need to select that, sir.
It says you are sharing, your screen is being shared. 1 minute. Yeah.
Only screen is shared, but that PPT which you want to show, that is not shared, sir.
My God. Why would that be? 1 minute. I'll try and do that. Because is it now visible? Can you confirm whether it's
No,
visible?
sir. No, sir.
No,
No,
sir.
sir. No.
Oh my God. But why does it? Because here it says you are screen sharing now.
So the screen is shared, but the PPT is not open. You just double click on that PPT, it will be open.
Which I did. I closed and did it again.
Okay. So was it open on your screen, on your this thing, laptop?
Yeah.
Yeah. So click on F5. Press F5. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. I think it is visible now.
It's visible now?
Yeah, it's visible
All
now.
right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the session is on pedagogy. We will start with larger issues of pedagogy and then move to innovation and then what are the possible examples of an innovative pedagogy. Though we will have a session for question and answer towards the end, but just in case you have any important point, please raise it right through the session. I have no issues with that. When we look at pedagogy, I think first we need to understand the term in the larger context. If you look at the entire education process, there are three important elements. One is curriculum, the other is pedagogy, and the third is assessment. Curriculum is all about what is worth learning, which essentially works out to some content, some domain knowledge, some skills perhaps. That's what curriculum is all about. And pedagogy is about how do students learn and also how do teachers teach. That's the pedagogy element. And the assessment is how do we know whether students have really learned or where is the problem for students in learning. So one is about what and the other two are about how. The first how is how do students learn and of course how do teachers teach. And assessment is about how do we know as people, as important stakeholders in the system, how do we know that students are learning? Or if they are not learning, what is the problem? That's the purpose of assessment. And student learning is absolutely, bang on when all these three are aligned with each other. They need to be aligned. I mean, between curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, there has to be an alignment. In fact, if in the context of new national education policy, when policy says, for example, we will do away with affiliation over a period of time in next 10 to 15 years, the idea was that how do we align these three elements? Because if you look at the system as it exists now, different groups of people do these three different things at different times and places. Curriculum is done by the university. Assessment is again shared between university and colleges. And pedagogy is almost entirely college affair. Universities hardly have any role. As a result, since the people who are responsible for these three dimensions are not together or they are separated, the possibility of aligning these three things is always a problem. And perhaps the one important way of working towards aligning them is when we bring all these three into the same unit. That is, for example, a college will design its own curriculum, look at how they teach and how their students learn, and also do the assessment. In which case, it becomes easier to align these three elements so that there is a significant learning for the student. I mean, this is an elaboration of what I said earlier. If you look at pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment, on curriculum we have least control, because it is usually, if you are an affiliated college, which is what most colleges in the country are, more than 95% of the colleges are affiliated colleges, where curriculum comes from university, over which college as an institution or as a community has a least control. Assessment, there is some influence, because perhaps most universities or most colleges today have moved towards formative assessment. So some form of formative assessment is done at the college level. Therefore, there is some influence in terms of assessment. Real control the colleges have or teachers have, and the entire process is in pedagogy. That's where we have maximum control. So if you look at three elements, the teachers and the colleges have maximum influence, control, or possibility of aligning at the level of pedagogy. Curriculum assessment are not fully under the control of the college. In that sense, it becomes imperative and it's important that we focus on pedagogy element more clearly. And pedagogy is also is what actually creates a learning experience for the student. Therefore, pedagogy becomes all the more critical. I mean, this is just just to lighten the mood. This is a very old cartoon where, sometimes when we talk of pedagogy, innovative pedagogy, we seem to be doing innovation for innovation's sake. We need to remember that this is just a more humorous take on what does it mean to be pedagogy. For a simple thing like 2 + 2, in what is being said there, in an increasingly complex world, sometimes old questions require a new answer. And the answer is something very, very complex. We are not looking at that way. Pedagogy is a way of facilitating learning, and how can we be a little more innovative in that? Let's look at the term pedagogy. Pedagogy is a term used in general sense for a teaching process or a teaching learning process. But if we look at the very term pedagogy, peda refers to child. I mean, like pediatrician being a child's doctor. Pedagogy, in terms of its etymology, is a method of teaching children. So, which is what applies when we are in the context of teaching smaller children. In a very derivative, in a more broader sense, we use pedagogy for any act of teaching or any method of teaching. But strictly speaking, the students whom we are teaching are adults or nearly adults. The students who come to us are in the age group of 17 and 23, roughly, in Indian context. They are almost adults. I mean, in a manner of speaking, a 17-year-old anyway believes that he's an adult. Whether he's adult or not is immaterial. Therefore, we are actually handling adults. And if we are looking at teaching adults or helping adults learn, the appropriate term must be andragogy. Andro referring to human beings, peda referring to small children. So andragogy is a way of facilitating adults to learn. And the whole idea of andragogy is based on a belief that adults learn slightly differently than children. The way we learn as children and the way we learn as adults, which is what our students are, is slightly different. Therefore, we technically need to look at it as andragogy, not so much as pedagogy. Though we continue to use because it's a more popular term, everybody understands it. But even when we use the word pedagogy in higher education, we need to be very clear that pedagogy, when we use the word pedagogy, we are actually talking about facilitating adult learners in our classrooms and colleges to learn. That's what we need to be very clear. When we say adult learning is based on certain ideas. Firstly, adults or those who come to us come with a certain experience. Because when students come to our class, they have gone through 17 to 18 years of life experience and at least 12 to 13 years of organized systematic educational process. So they come with certain experience and they have a lot of previous experience, which can be leveraged for their learning, because the experience that they come with is a rich resource of learning. And therefore, adults believe they are autonomous, independent, and they would like to be self-directed. And hence, adults gravitate towards learning things that matter to them. They would like learn things which matter to them. Many times, a disengaged learner is a result of learner's feeling, rightly or wrongly, learner's feeling that what they are learning does not matter to them or to their lives or to their future. And that's if the adult learner believes that what they are learning matters to them, they are more ready to learn. And adults would like to learn what has an immediate application. It has a use. They need to perceive, they need to see, they need to feel that there is a use for what they are learning. And therefore, they become internally motivated. And adults need to know the value of what they are learning. It's very important for any adult to know why they are learning what they are learning, which is one of the challenges, because when we, in the conventional sense, in a teaching learning process, we believe we are teaching them something relevant, important to them, but we have not communicated in a very formal, structured, intentional way that what they are learning has a meaning for them, what they are learning has a use for them, what they are learning has a value for their life, their profession, their future, and therefore they need to learn. So adults have a certain sense of self. They come with a large experience, which either readies them or resists them to learning. They would like to learn something which has an immediate application, and they need to know why they are learning what they are learning. Hence, all this readies them to learn because it motivates them internally. So this is how we look at an adult learner. And when we say andragogy, it assumes this. Therefore, whenever we use the word pedagogy, whatever experiment that we do in pedagogy needs to be very clear that these are the things which are necessary to understand, because this helps us to understand our learners. And once we understand the learner, it becomes that much more effective to teach. Drawing from these, we can say there are few principles of learning. One, students, we have said, come with prior experience. This prior experience can help learning or can hinder learning. It can work both ways. But we need to recognize that there is experience. Disregarding that experience, if we try to teach, it will not be very effective. If what they come with is a positive experience or correct understanding of things, then their previous experience helps them to learn. What they have learned earlier or their experience has been defective or lopsided, skewed, then it will hinder learning. But we need to recognize that students' prior experience, prior knowledge influences learning in a big way. And how students organize knowledge influences how they learn and their ability to apply. Because a lot of, in the educational process, lot of domain knowledge or information or knowledge is transmitted to students. And if that knowledge comes to the student or student receives it as bits and pieces unconnected to each other, then they will not be able to really understand what they're learning. Therefore, it's very important when students learn to organize knowledge, that influences their learning and that influences their ability to apply what they learn. And these two contribute to student motivation, because motivation is what helps them towards learning and also sustains their learning. And in order to learn anything, whatever one is learning, be it mathematics, be it music, be it literature, be it physics, each learning has many component skills. And learning something means learning all the component skills. Learning cricket or learning to bat in cricket is not only about batting, it's about many other things. The way I move my hand, my ability to run, my ability to drive, my muscular development. So there are many things which I have to focus on in order to learn. Similarly, in any learning, there are many component skills. Only by practicing each of the component skills and learning to integrate all of them together, I will be able to learn better. And any practice which should help learning should be goal directed, and we need feedback for that. In fact, assessment, especially formative assessment, is a very important feedback which helps students to learn. And students' current level of development is influenced by social, emotional, and intellectual climate of the course, the background from which students come, the kind of environment that we create in a classroom in our institution. If it is safe, inclusive, supportive environment, it helps in learning. So there are other factors other than so-called purely academic factors which influence learning. That includes the climate that we create in the institution and also the kind of baggage that students bring from their background, their own social, emotional background. And the most important thing for a student to learn is students should be able to not only learn, but be conscious of how they are learning and why they are able to learn or why they are not able to learn. I mean, they should not only learn, but they should learn to learn, which means be conscious of the learning process, which is technically called metacognitive skills. Because when I know how I am learning, it helps me to learn better. When I'm conscious of my learning process, I will know why I am not able to learn something, and then I can work on that factor. Therefore, these are principles of learning which kind of are underlying our process of pedagogy. There is one more idea which we need to be very clear, which is called pedagogical content knowledge. When I teach something, be it economics, physics, or literature, there are two things. One is there is a content that I am teaching, whatever subject I am teaching. There is a content knowledge. Then there is a pedagogical knowledge. And the intersection of these two is what we call a pedagogical content knowledge. So content knowledge includes the ideas, the concepts in the discipline that I am teaching, physics or economics, whichever may be that. There is a certain language of each discipline, technical terms are there. It is addressing a certain big questions. It has a certain method or a tool that each subject uses. Yeah, all that is content knowledge. So when I teach, one thing that's very important part of my pedagogy is the content knowledge, which is what I would like the students to acquire. But there is also pedagogical knowledge when I'm teaching, which is how does teaching learning take place? How do students learn? They are adults. There are certain things that influences their learning. So these are the pedagogical principles. When these two interact, we have this area called pedagogical content knowledge, PCK, which is knowledge of how to organize and represent the particular content to a variety of learners. Okay, it's not just about how students learn, and it's not just about the content knowledge. How do I integrate both so that I can teach a particular content, particular kind of a content, or a particular subject or a discipline to a specific set of learners? What I use as a technique to a one set of learner doesn't work to another set of learners because they are different, the way they understand. As teachers, we all know that same things don't work for every batch of students because the learners are different. Each batch perhaps has a slightly different set of learners. Therefore, when I combine the content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge, I get what is called pedagogical content knowledge, which helps me to how to organize and teach a content to a particular set of learners. And each subject is different. Therefore, I teach it differently. The way I teach mathematics cannot be the way I teach literature or cannot be the way I teach music. And each subject has its own signature pedagogy. You know, it's a way I can teach. Yeah. So there is content knowledge, there is pedagogical knowledge, there is a specific content which is amenable to a certain kind of pedagogy. When I put all this together is when I have pedagogical content knowledge. In a pedagogical situation, there are two players largely. One is student, the other is teacher or instructor. If you look at this picture, you know, whenever the student, whenever the teacher is very active, for example, in a standard lecture format, when I am perhaps lecturing very large part of my 1 hour class, yeah, then I am the one who's very, very active. I am the one who's doing most of the work, so to say. When my role, if you see the one end of the spectrum, when lecture is mentioned, the lecture, which means the instructor's part, is very dominant. And there, the student is only doing either listening or at the most listening and taking some notes, which means student engagement becomes minimum. Whenever the faculty involvement is very large, the student engagement becomes narrow. As it goes down, which means as the instructor domination in a teaching learning situation reduces, the student's activity becomes important, which means the way we run a class and how the students are engaged with what they are learning also depends on how we handle it. If I'm using a very traditional method like lecture, I am the one who's doing most of it, active rather, and students are very passive, therefore they do the minimum. Or I can put it slightly differently. So when teacher is doing maximum in a lecture like this, the student has very minimum role, but as it increases, lecture to lab, to tutorial, to project, to case study, to problem solving, the teacher's teachers doing the work reduces. Teacher becomes a facilitator and student does most of the work. Therefore, student is more involved. Because it is another simple principle of learning that students will learn effectively only if they are actively engaged with what they are learning, whatever it may be. Yeah, it is the cognitive engagement of the students which helps them to learn. And when teacher is very, very active, students tend to be passive and therefore their cognitive engagement is less. So therefore, how do I choose a method, or how do I choose a pedagogy? A critical factor that influences is one is my diversity of learners. Then there is also a certain understanding of what is learning. For example, if I believe learning is only memorizing, then I have a certain way of looking at teaching learning process. But if I believe learning is not about memorizing, it's about understanding, ability to apply, ability to learn further, then I have a different approach. So there is a certain theory, whether I am conscious or not, whether I want it or not, whether I like it or not, there is always a certain theory or an understanding of how learning takes place, which decides how I choose my pedagogical method. Teachers need to include and integrate characteristic of different theories because we teach different things. Sometimes we want them to memorize, sometimes we want them to learn to apply. So therefore we need to change or we need to use variety of pedagogical techniques. I just want you to remember that when we use the word theory, it's not something very abstract. That's why I put that quote there. There is nothing as practical as a good theory is. Theory essentially means my mental presuppositions about a certain act. I believe government will function like this, or governments will function like this. That's my understanding. They may or they may not function like that. That's a secondary issue. But I have a certain theory about how the whole thing functions. Similarly, all of us as teachers, we have a certain understanding of how learning happens. Therefore, how I should teach. That's my theory. I may not be always conscious, but there is this theory which is kind of informing my process of teaching learning. And so when I choose what kind of students, where are my students, what is their level, what level are they, what kind of style are they. I mean, people learn differently. Are they ones who have better language skills? Are they ones who like to do things and learn by hand? So what is their learning style? What kind of interest do they have? And what level of, what is my objective? What level of cognitive? Do I just want them to memorize? Do I want them to understand? Do I want them to apply? Do I want them to analyze? Then my teaching method has to change accordingly. Yeah. And obviously, it is also influenced by two other factors, which is what am I teaching and what is the constraint that I have, which includes time and resource. One is the content, the way I teach mathematics and the way I teach music or literature. I use different things because by very nature, those contents are very, very different in nature. Therefore, in order to learn, I need make students learn. I need to use different kind of techniques or pedagogical tools. And then the two other important resources with me is time. Do I have sufficient time? And what resources do I have? Do I have technology with me? Do I have a classroom where I can rearrange the furniture so that I can create more interaction between students? So these are resources that I have. Or do I have any other interesting resource with me? Can I show a film? Can I show a video? This is a resource I may or I may not have. So when I choose a method, I need to keep all this in mind. Or when I choose a method, I'm influenced by all these factors. That decides the kind of pedagogy that I'm going to use. So we use variety of methods. Some examples I'm sure everybody here is aware of. Group work, demonstration, lecture is almost a default mode. Questioning, question answer, discussion, discovery, cooperative. When we get students to work in groups, we are asking them to work cooperatively. So that's a cooperative learning. Problem solving. So this depends on, how do we organize students? Do we want students to work individually or groups? And how do I, as a teacher, deliver things? This is an important thing that I would like you to appreciate. This is a theory of Robert Gagne, psychologist, who worked for a long time with the American Military Training Academy. And therefore, in a military training, when you are training people for a warlike situation, you have to really break down everything, because you're always responding to a warlike situation where there is no time to discuss, reflect, think. It has to be almost automatic. Yeah. Therefore, our entire learning process, Gagne breaks into very, very, very small bits and pieces. And he says there are 9 instruction things that happen. First thing is gaining attention of my learners. And once I gain their attention, I inform them what is the purpose of this process of learning that we are meeting now, this particular class. And we have already said our students come with prior learning. So we need to stimulate their prior learning, because they all have learning, either right or wrong. And both are important to be stimulated and understand what they have learned. Because if they already have a mistaken learning, what we teach goes and sits on that mistaken learning and it gets corrupted. And if what they have come with is the proper learning, then what we have taught now goes and sits on it, and therefore it becomes very effective. In either case, it's important for us to know what is their prior learning. Therefore, we need to stimulate. Then present the stimulus, which means give what we want to give them, and provide guidance, and make them perform, and provide feedback, and then assess their performance, and help them to retain, and then help them to transfer what they have learned. How does this transfer into our everyday thing? Which means present the learner with an introductory activity that engages the learner. Because please remember, learner comes from another class or from home, and therefore he is perhaps, or he or she is not perhaps focused and get their attention. Therefore, we need to have an introductory activity where we gain their attention. That becomes very important. Yeah. Once we gain their attention, when we tell them what is the objective, what are we going to learn today, or in this particular learning context, then we present the learner with an experience that stimulates the prior learning. When we ask a question, perhaps find other ways to stimulate their prior learning. Then we give them a content, yeah, and we give an example. We not only give a content, we give an example. We provide an opportunity to practice, solve the problem, or restate the issue, or to say where can you apply it. So we are giving opportunity to practice, and then give them feedback once they practice, and then after they assess, we can give them further, how do they go further, and then give them resources that will enhance their retention, retain what they have learned, and also transfer. Because the most important part, and which is where perhaps one of the challenges of higher education, because we are not always successful, is facilitating students' ability to transfer what they have learned in a classroom situation to another situation in profession or in life. So this transfer is very important. Now, when I make that into a class, into a regular 1-hour class, let's say, when I give an introduction to a class, which I may take 5 or 2 to 5 minutes, one thing, I gain their attention. So I may do it either through an activity, through showing a video, by asking a question. I may do it in different ways. The idea is to gain their attention. Once I have their attention with me, then I give them the objective, the purpose of this class. And then I may ask a question to find out their previous learning. Then my new knowledge is presented, what I want to teach. I will refine what I have taught. I may recap. I may put it in different words. Okay. Then talk about its application. give them an opportunity to apply, and I will be able to evaluate, because I want to understand when they apply what I have taught them, whether they have really learned or not. And once I have the evaluation, then I move towards improving their learning and consolidating, which is what happens when I review at the end of the class. So I start with an introduction, I end with a review. But what I am doing in this whole process, which is what Gagne has taught us, and it's very interesting way of looking at even a conventional lecture, that I start with gaining an attention, stating the purpose, giving a new knowledge by even connecting to previous learning, then tell them how it can be applied, provide opportunity for applying it, evaluate their performance, and then help them consolidate their learning by reviewing. Okay. Since lecture, given our many constraints, lecture tends to be our default mode. We also need to understand that lecture should not ideally happen in one uninterrupted 45 minutes or 1 hour duration. To the extent possible, we need to have 3 or 4 logical blocks. I take a lecture for 8 or 10 minutes, give a break, then go to the second one, then give a break and go to the next one. When I say break, very clear, break is only a change of activity, not a break in the regular sense of the term, that they go away or they take rest or something. I will stop lecturing and perhaps I give an activity. It can be a question. It can be see a video of applying what I have taught till now. So always a lecture interspersed by activity in between. So I begin with an introduction, then my lecture gets split into 3 or 4 logical wholes. They are interconnected, what I speak in those 10 minutes. And then I give a break, 3 to 4 minutes, and then go to the next segment of lecture. Then again break again, I repeat, is a change of activity, not a break. And then move to the next one. In the end, I summarize so that they consolidate and what they have learned is very clear. Apart from this, we all aware, and I don't want to spend more time on that, we use different methods. We innovate. But we have to be very clear, why do we innovate? One is, I'm sure people are aware of this term called 21st century skills, because the world has changed so much in last 20, 30 years, and it's going to change unbelievably in perhaps next 20 years. That the content that I learn may not be relevant, but while learning that content or while teaching that content, the kind of skills that students acquire, the skills of ability to think critically, ability to communicate in different forms, ability to handle technology, ability to work in team, these become 21st century skills. So these things are changing from what I needed to learn 20 years ago, 10 years ago, perhaps, are already changing. And definitely we live in an age of machine learning, artificial intelligence, chat GPT. So the kind of things we need to survive and thrive in this world are going to be different. Therefore, I may not be very different in what I teach, but it's very important to make a difference in how I teach, which is where pedagogical innovation comes. And our learner profiles are also getting more and more diverse. Hence, we need to use different pedagogies. And education is more to do with employability. Students are seen as consumers or partners in the process of learning. Hence, I need to use different pedagogical techniques. Technology is is part of every aspect of our life. And the learners who come to us are what in today's language, they are digital natives. And many of us are digital, immigrants. Technology was not part of our growing up, but we have immigrated into it because it's important that we cannot avoid technology today. But they are tech natives. And therefore, there is a need to have a different pedagogy so that we understand and we are able to make learning more effective. And I just want to make this just point a little more in detail. There is a whole area emerging called scholarship of teaching and learning. It's not only about teaching and learning. How can I reflect? How can I articulate? How can I talk? How can I share to my fellow community members of teaching something differently or in a new way so that it makes sense to my learners, so their learning is much better. Yeah. Today, largely, teaching is a very siloed, solo affair. In a class, I am there and my 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever number of students are there. It's between me and my students. There is rarely anybody else participating in this. In that sense, it's a solo affair. What happens between me and there is another set, which is my students. But I'm contrasting this, for example, with research. When I do research in any field of inquiry, I'm doing the research, yeah. But when I arrive at a certain idea, certain technique, certain conclusions, I publish it. I go to a seminar or a conference and I share it. Whom am I sharing? I'm sharing with my fellow colleagues, my other members of my community, academic community. And they respond to it. They accept it, they criticize it. When they accept it, that is an acceptance for what I am talking about. There is that means what I am saying acquires a credibility. Yeah? When there is a criticism, that is a scope for me to improve. Yeah? Therefore, research is very sought after, glamorous, rewarded, because it is a public affair. Whereas teaching tends to be not so rewarded, even in our institutional framework, because it's a very solo affair. So there is a whole lot of thinking today that we need to convert teaching also into a very scholarly activity. Teaching is not a mechanical transmission of information. Yeah, it is also a scholarly work, like I do research in my domain. In order for it to become scholarly, I need to articulate, I need to experiment, I need to justify, and most importantly, I need to put it in a structured format and share it with my community members and seek their approval, review, criticism, whatever may be the case. Therefore, if you look around, you will see today there are journals practically in every subject, like it's called teaching mathematics, teaching physics, teaching economics, teaching business. These are journals which are dedicated to doing research into teaching of the discipline. And since we as teachers all the time are teaching, I think our next stage in our pedagogical growth, or as pedagogues, our growth is in making teaching learning much more scholarly process by articulating, by experimenting, articulating, sharing it with our community members in a very structured way. So when we say we want to do pedagogical innovation, it has few elements. One, it should be novel. May not be completely never done in human history kind of thing, but it should have an element for surprise. It should be different from what students are used to learning that thing through. At least in the students' context of learning a particular content, it should be novel. It should be engaging. Students should be cognitively involved in what they're learning. And it should be focused on the outcomes. What do we want to achieve? What do we want students to be able to do at the end of learning a particular content? And they should be able to, they should be able to reflect, we should be able to reflect. Yeah? And it will make students' understanding of that domain knowledge better. And they should be able to use or leverage technology to help learning. And it should make link to discipline and impact at different levels. I should be able to apply this new method, this innovation in pedagogy at different levels. And it should also, allow me to learn. I mean, when I experiment with something, I am also evolving, I am also improving, I am also learning. So it's a learning for teachers. It helps me, I take risk, and it helps me to mature as a teacher. So when I say pedagogical innovation, these are the features of pedagogical innovations. One of the important things that we need to realize, and if you are sensitive to what new national education policy is saying, this becomes all the more relevant. Because policy is talking of multidisciplinary and holistic education, which means it is essentially saying the role of disciplines is changing. Discipline is not about a body of knowledge. Discipline is about a certain mindset. History is not about certain dates and events, or physics is not about certain concepts or theories. It is about a certain way of looking at reality. History tells us, if I have to take one example, history is telling us how everything evolves, grows over a period of time, how it gets influenced by a variety of factors. That's what history is teaching us. So if I have to learn history, in learning historical facts or dates, I'm also learning to think like a historian. When I say I learn to think like a historian means I should, any phenomena presented to me in my professional life or personal life, I should be able to find out how this event or phenomena or idea has evolved, or what are the influences that have fashioned it. That's to think like that's what I have to learn from historian. So in that sense, the policy is talking of different role for discipline. Not that I will not learn history, not that I will learn economics, but I will learn them from a different perspective. And in order to acquire this, we need to have what I would call inductive teaching, perhaps move a little away from deductive teaching, which has been the conventional approach. Because what we do normally is, deduction is we move from general to particular, induction is we move from particular to general. If we keep that in mind, in a deductive teaching, we begin with theory. This is what we do now traditionally in a class. Teach a theory, teach an idea, teach a concept. Yeah. Now, then perhaps give an application or where you can use it. Yeah. Which means we start with what and then perhaps move to the question of why. Why are we learning that? This is in order to engage students, it becomes a bit difficult. This doesn't immediately, because they're adult learners, they want immediate purpose for everything they learn. Therefore, an inductive approach or a balancing inductive with deductive is more beneficial, where in inductive I start with a specific problem, case, an issue, and then I move from there to a theory or an idea. So what I am doing, I am creating a need, why I need to understand this theory, because there is this problem, therefore I need to understand. Yeah. So start with a problem, start with an application, start with the use, start with where it works, and then move towards theory. Which means we will not start with theory but move towards theory. start with specifics. Yeah, I'm not saying that we should move away from theory totally. What we need to do is balance deductive and deductive. We are very largely deductive today, and that doesn't go well. And therefore, if we can balance inductive and deductive, learning can be much deeper and more significant. And therefore, we use different things, and they work differently. For example, what are the methods of what is involved in an inductive approach, which is either a problem, you provide a case, you allow students to discover a course, there is an active learning, there is collaboration between students, and different methods use these in different ways. If it's an inquiry method, you always start with a problem, and you perhaps have a complex problem, and you will have a major project sometimes. You will also sometimes use a case study. So variety of things, variety of subject, variety of pedagogical tools that we use different features of inductive teaching. Yeah. I'll quickly, I'm sure you are aware of it, so I will not take much time here. Few things that we use are demonstration, where faculty performs the skills, or if possible, allow students to perform the skill, thereby they learn it. And it helps students to turn theory into practice. And my role as a teacher is to set up the demonstration, set up the equipment, and if possible, give learners chance to practice. And I need to try out demonstration beforehand in the class, because if the demonstration fails when it is actually happening, it works, it doesn't become an effective learning process. What is the learner's role? They need to know why demonstration is being done, because in the absence of that, it becomes one event. I don't learn anything. Something interesting happened in the class, but why did we do it? And that's very important to understand why demonstration happened. Seminar is where learners present a paper, all of us discuss. It helps students to become independent, promote initiative, leadership, develop their communication skills. And there, my role is to select a topic, arrange a seminar, or help them choose the topic, help them write up, allow them to think through, and give feedback when they actually present a seminar. Learner's role is gather information, prepare and present, and draw conclusion, and learn from the feedback given by the faculty. Role play is actually a simulation. You simulate a certain thing, whether it is certain equipment that is working, whether it is a market, whether it is a marketing process. You can actually create a situation in the classroom by using students to play different roles. Yeah, by giving them a scenario, it helps them to experience the reality. The thing actually. It helps them to experience that thing, not just a theoretical knowledge. It involves them. It brings reality into classroom, and therefore I explain. What I do is I explain, introduce, assign roles, give guidelines, and review their role play. And what do learners do? They understand the purpose, they act, and they analyze. In a group discussion, there is a discussion between the students. It involves students. It helps them to learn how to discuss, how to listen to each other, how to decide, because what position is correct, how can I defend my argument. Overall, it improves their communication skills. And my role as a facilitator is to select a topic, suggest the reading, keep the discussion on track, because from our experience, the discussion in a classroom can go off track. And there are always some people who will not participate. So one of my important roles is to draw everybody into discussion, encourage everybody. And as a student, my role is to participate in selecting the topic, read the given material, follow the group norms, which means talk when my turn comes, listen to others, participate, and of course, assimilate from all that I have learned, all that I am hearing. In here, case study is either a real or an imaginary situation. Perhaps business and commerce uses it more, but it can be used in any discipline. Give a certain case, which is a slice of reality, but instead of seeing a reality, it is described as a case, perhaps a written material, and students are expected to solve the problem or respond to that case. In the process, they learn problem-solving skills. They learn how to respond to diverse problems. They learn how to discuss. And my role as a faculty is to prepare or select a case study, develop questions for them to respond to, and help students to analyze and solve. If I'm a learner, my role is analyze and offer solution, understand what is the real issue in the case, contribute to the discussion, and learn how to solve a case. Brainstorming is a method we use when we want to generate many ideas. For example, I may give a certain word and say, what does this word mean to you? What are the different uses of this? Let's say I have a pen, which we all use for writing. What can this be used for? What other purposes can this be used for? And within a certain time frame, I push everybody to think. And people will come up with crazy ideas, what it can be. Can it be used as a peg? Can it be used as a door stopper? Can it be used as anything? There can be many uses other than writing for which it is designed, right? And we record all that. We don't judge what is right, what is wrong. Having recorded, then all of us sit together and say which is practical, what is not practical in a given set of ideas that students have given. Now, what it means is, it involves everybody. It forces them to think differently, yeah, and which means ability to look at a problem differently and solve it, yeah. And therefore, my role here is to start the discussion, present ground rules, assist them in generating ideas, appoint a recorder, or at least myself record everything on a whiteboard or a chalkboard. And what do I, as a learner, do? Think critically, think carefully, present my ideas, and then help in evaluation. So brainstorming as a technique helps in generating ideas, and it gives me an ability to think about the situation in variety of ways. So these are some of the things which we may use. And given that now the technology is very prevalent, we also use what is called a flipped classroom. A flipped classroom essentially flips the traditional classroom, reverses it, flips it. What happens in a traditional classroom? Students are introduced to a new material. I give a lecture or solve a problem, think about a theory. There is a certain new material given to students, and students understand it. And then perhaps I give them homework assignment, which is to apply, solve it. And then they go home and solve. But just look at it slightly more, in depth. Classroom is a very fertile environment meant for learning, designed for learning. We are all gathered there for learning. Students come for learning. I am there to help them learning. And there are very few distractions as compared to when I go home. Firstly, I don't know what kind of an environment exists in different learners' home. Even otherwise, there is no support. There are many distractions. Okay? And what do we do in a class? We understand a material, which is cognitively not a very demanding thing. But applying it and solving a problem using what I have learned is a much more demanding, cognitively deeper thing. So I have pushed cognitively deeper thing into an environment which is not so conducive, which is my place with all distractions. And I'm using a very, very conducive environment to do something which is cognitively not so demanding. So can we flip, which means in a traditional classroom, what I do is I give the material which they need to study, or perhaps if technologically possible, I even record my class and share it with students. They either read or listen to me, and when they come to class, we will only discuss how to apply. So we have flipped. What happens at home or after the class comes into class, and what was happening in the class will now happen outside the class. Thereby, we are creating much more engagement for the students in an environment which helps them to do this, which is classroom, and help them to go deeper. So this is another possibility that we can explore. And in all this, I think I have just 2 slides which I would like you to go through. One, please remember that students look at entire process differently than us. We have objectives, learning outcomes, teaching activity, assessment. But for a student, assessment is curriculum. Everything is focused on assessment. Therefore, if we want students to learn something, then that something must be part of assessment. We cannot expect students to learn something which is not part of assessment, because students look at learning only through this prism of assessment. And secondly, for us, when we plan in a different way. You know, there are graduate attributes, there are program learning outcomes. My course has an outcome, my individual lesson has an outcome. This is how I plan. But when I deliver, I start with a lesson, because when the outcomes of the lessons are achieved through the pedagogy that I am using, learning outcomes of the course are achieved, thereby the program outcomes are achieved, and therefore I would be able to achieve the vision I have for higher education for my students. So it's like, when I drive, I look into the rear view mirror also, but I'm driving forward. So I need to plan it backwards, but when I deliver forward. I think I'll stop there and open this for a discussion. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, thank you, sir.
I'll just take a minute. What I have discussed is the larger context of pedagogy. What does pedagogy involve? Pedagogy essentially focuses on learning. Therefore, we are focused on learning process. And why have innovation? And what are the possible innovation? Thank you.
So thank you, sir. Sir, do you have time for question answer session?
Yes. We can definitely take few minutes, 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah.
So, dear participants, if any of you have any query, you can ask it. You can unmute and ask, or you can post it in chat.
Yeah, either way, it's fine.
Anybody? Any question? Sir, I think everything is clear.
This is sounding more like our classroom. When you ask your students any question, this is what happens normally. So, yeah, feel free.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Sir. Thank you very much, sir, for your spending valuable time with us.
Thank you.
And provided us great information on this innovative pedagogy. And you explained clearly about how to make teaching learning interesting. And your explanation was very wonderful, very interesting session. And I also will not be taking much time because I know you are in a hurry to go for another program.
No, it's okay. I mean, please.
So
Yeah.
thank you very much, sir. We are expecting this type of lectures in future also.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Feel free if there is anything to get back. Okay. Thank you.
So dear participants, our second session speaker is Professor Dr. Ved Prakash, former chairman UGC and also Chancellor KIIT University, Institution of Eminence, Bhubaneswar, also Vice President, Dayanand Anglo-Vedic National Management Committee, New Delhi. Since Sir has sent the recorded speech, so we will be hearing to the recorded speech now itself. So there is no need to wait till 6 o'clock. Immediately we will be starting with the second session. Over to you, Shraddha ma'am.
Okay, ma'am, I'll start.
To do in this first lecture is, let me share with you that if you look into the history of education of the world, you will find that education started off in a very informal manner. There were very wise people in the society, and when the people would come to know about them, that they are very enlightened people, people would go to them and they would try to learn things from them. So that was the initial mode of education. Later on, the people who were very well off, they started inviting enlightened people in their homes to teach their children. So this is how the education started off. I will not go into the entire history of evolution of education, but the point that I'm trying to make here today is that there are countries which have come up with the formulation of the policies long time ago. Some of those countries have even stopped making policies. They have left it to the individual institutions, like the United States of America and many more advanced countries. Actually, we have memories like this from the colonial rule. It was in 1913 when we came up with the first policy. Policy is a very important document for us. And as we did discuss in the inaugural session, that we have a policy document in our hands now, we must read every word of it and try to understand implications of every statement of intent that the policy contains. And therefore you should start reading it, take it as a homework, and go through all those 63 pages of the policy actually. And since you are associated with an institution, you can also organize discourses on the national education policy collectively, And you can also look into, as I had said earlier, the physical and social conditions of your institutions. And then you can identify the guiding principles to move forward. Let us try to understand the difference between a policy document and a vision document. As a university or as a college, you may be having the vision statement. You may be having the mission statements, and then you may be having the action plan. A policy document has to be quite different from the vision document. The vision could be utopian, but the policy has to be realistic and practicable. And in this lecture of mine, I'm going to focus only on the concept of policy, characteristics of a good policy, and what are the different approaches to formulate a policy, and what were the earlier policies that we had brought out, and what were the basis of those earlier policies, and what has been the basis of this present policy. So in the next 40 minutes, I'm going to focus only on these aspects so that you get fully familiarized with the policy formulation, with the characteristics of the policy, and given the opportunity, you can also analyze the policy 2020 now by applying those instruments. So let us know, what does a policy mean actually? A policy is a statement of intent. That is what I had said earlier, and I would like to reiterate it once again. And which is why it need not be a bulky document. Policy is an essential component for planned growth and planned development. And which is why we have brought out the policy, and we have been bringing out policies in the past as well. Policy addresses pertinent issues in a very systematic manner, and which is why you would find that we begin with the early childhood and care education in our policy document, and then we end up with the implementation plan. From early childhood and care education, we talk about the school education, elementary education, then we talk about secondary education, then we talk about vocational education, and then we talk about the higher education, professional education, internationalization, and all that actually. We bring out policy because it guides our decisions. And it not only guides our decisions, it ensures consistency in our decision making. That is yet another important reason as to why we bring out the policy. Policy helps us achieve rational outcomes. Policy also tells us where do we stand vis-a-vis the others. Policy also tells us what is that has worked in the past and what is that has not worked in the past, which is missing actually in the current policy. Policy also tells us where do we want to reach in 10 years from hence, or 15 years from hence, or 5 years from hence. And then policy also tells us what should be the guiding principles when we move forward. You may not find these steps into the policy, into the current policy, but when you analyze this policy independently, I think you can undertake this as an exercise, and it will give you greater clarity actually. You may like to know that where do we stand in higher education vis-a-vis the other Asian countries, vis-a-vis the developing countries, other developing countries of the world, vis-a-vis the developed countries of the world. You may also be interested to know that in 160 odd years of the modern Indian higher education, what is that has worked in the past and what is that has not worked in the past. You can come out with that kind of critical analysis. Insofar as undergraduate education is concerned, graduate education is concerned, research is concerned, the regulatory mechanism is concerned. And then you may also put your heads together. You can do it individually or you can do it collectively as an institution. And you can set standards before yourself that would you like to be in 5 years from hence or 10 years from hence or 20 years from hence. And then what should be the guiding principles when you move forward? So this is one exercise that you can undertake as a policy analyst. And when you are analyzing the policy, you would like to see that whether the policy that we have brought out is not then, or whether or not it is detrimental to the interest of the society. That is one analysis you may like to undertake. And when you thumb through the policy document, you may also like to find out and identify sports which you would find mutually contradictory. You can also find whether it reflects all its objectives in an unambiguous terms. And for that, what is more important is that the language of the policy must be simple and lucid. It should not be the legal language. Because when you go through the legal documents, many a time you find it very difficult to comprehend. And therefore, when you are analyzing it, you may identify sections wherein you find the language little more cumbersome, ambiguous, and you may like to point out that. The policy should also sound logical and flexible, because different states and different institutions are at different stages of development. And if you say that by 2030, all the existing institutions will become multidisciplinary institutions of higher learning, that kind of rigidity will not help us transform all the existing institutions into multi-faculty institutions of higher learning. So policy should be sound, but at the same time, it should be logical, it should be flexible, and it should provide guidance in future planning. So when you are analyzing it, you may again try to identify those kinds of threads into the policy. Because my purpose of today's lecture is to share with you the elements which are essentially required to analyze the policy. And it should be consistent, as I had said. It should not create confusion, because if it creates confusion in its statements, then it would not be possible. It will lead to delays in action. Any policy when we make has an element of utopianism. And therefore, what is necessary for any policy, that policy should be periodically reviewed. We have done it in the past. The earlier national education policy, which was brought out in 1986, was reviewed in 1990. And in 1992, we came out with the modified version of the national education policy. It was reviewed by Acharya Ramamurthy committee. I'm going to talk to you after some time. Now, the question arises how the policies are made. Policy should be made on the basis of the need analysis, actually. What are our needs? We should analyze them thoroughly, and then we should come up with the policy. Policy should always be driven by the needs of the nation. And which is why I had said that what does India need in education? We should have that clarity in our mind insofar as school education is concerned, vocational education is concerned, and the higher education is concerned, technical education is concerned. And when we make policy, it usually happens that we try to charter our own path. And when we charter our own path, we try to look around and pick up things from here and there. Like we made our own constitution. We picked up things from different places, put them together, and made the Indian constitution. But in policy, while there is nothing wrong in looking up for the best practices around you, but those best practices may not work in your own context. So the onus lies on the policy formulators that they should identify only those practices that seem to be workable in our own context. And because our contexts are so varied, because of the different stages of development of different states, that it becomes a very difficult task for us. We are not a small nation. We are a nation of 137 crore people. We are a nation of 36 states and union territories, actually. So, whatever we have picked up, considering the best from elsewhere, may not always be the best for us. And therefore, our practices must be such that they are inclusive in nature. Our recommendation should deliver as much in the state of Punjab as in the state of Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand or West Bengal or Arunachal Pradesh. That is the biggest challenge for a country like India, actually. Now, when I talk about the approaches to policy formulation, usually there are 4 kinds of approaches which are followed in policy formulation. Now listen to this very carefully and try to analyze this policy from those 4 perspectives. The first approach is that you use flowery language, raise questions in each sector of education, but you come out with answers and recommendations that can easily be manipulated. This is one approach of policy formulation. Let me repeat it, that you use flowery language, raise questions and come out with recommendations which are easy to manipulate. There are policies. It has come out of the policy analysis, actually. You will also learn it if you read the material on policy formulation, that people have made those kinds of policies. The second approach is, I'm going to tell you the name of, I'm going to give you the nomenclature a little later, but let me tell you what are the 4 different approaches without naming them. The second approach could be that you raise only select questions, selected questions you hammer on, and come out with answers that suits the requirement of the dispensation. People in power might raise questions which suit them. So that is another approach. You may like to look into the statements of this policy and see whether There are statements like this. There are recommendations like that. The third approach could be a very typical approach, that you keep all the possible questions which can come in anybody's mind and provide fascinating answers, knowing fully well, and make recommendations, knowing fully well that neither the political will nor the economy of the country is going to support them. Let me reiterate it once again, actually. I mean, the third approach could be that you keep all possible questions and provide very fascinating answers and make recommendations, knowing fully well that neither the political will nor the economy will support them. That could be yet another approach of policy formulation. There is one more approach for policy formulation, wherein you raise all possible questions, find answers based on empirical evidences which are in sync with the harsh realities of your country, and extend honest support to make them happen. So what are you doing in the fourth approach? That you are raising all possible questions across the sectors of education, and you try to find answers beforehand based on empirical evidences, not on the basis of the gut feeling, not on the basis of perception of individuals or a group of people. And those must be in sync with the ground realities, the harsh realities. And then you extend honest support to make them happen. This is what is the fourth approach. And therefore, I'm going to give you this homework today in between of my lecture, that you analyze this policy from these four different perspectives. And now, what is the first approach called? The first approach, wherein I have said that use flowery language, raise questions, and come out with answers that are easy to manipulate. That is a spurious approach to policy formulation. The second one, wherein you are raising only the selected questions and coming out with recommendations, coming out with answers and recommendations which suit the dispensation. That is what is known as unprincipled approach to policy formulation, because you are not honest with the people of the country. And the third is the typical administrative approach, that you keep all possible questions and provide fascinating answers, make lofty recommendations, knowing it fully well that neither the political will nor the economy is going to support them. So that is the typical administrative approach of policy formulation. And the fourth one is the approach which is the most genuine approach, that you raise all possible questions, find answers, and answers not based on individual's perception but based on empirical evidences, and based on empirical evidences which are in sync with the ground realities, the harsh realities of the sector, and then you extend an honest support to make them happen. So these are the four different approaches which you may like to use for the purposes of analyzing the current policy on education 2020. So let me sum up this part of my address, by saying that how well we have designed our National Education Policy 2020 in our own context will depend upon how well we understand it now and how well we orient the policy implementers. Because the policy formulators were a very small group of 10 people. And the policy implementers are going to be a large group. So how well are we going to orient them, those who are going to implement it? Like in the film industry, the actor will have to enter into the character of the person and then act. So you will have to understand the real intent of every statement. Only then you would be able to come out with a proper strategy for its implementation, and only then you would be able to implement it. And the third thing would be that how well we take the states on board. The share of education, bulk of the share of education lies with the states. Only less than 15% share is with the central government, and more than 85% share of education is with the state governments. So how are we going to take the states on board? The success will depend upon that. And then the fourth one, if all these states are not at par with each other, some states are having much weaker resources than others, then how we as the federal government going to finance our efforts? That is what is going to be of greater significance. Because the revenue collection in our country is such that the major part of it goes to the federal government and little part is left with the state governments, which is why the state governments have got weak resources. And if they have to shoulder the greater responsibility in terms of transacting education, then they would need resources. So how are we going to finance their efforts for the implementation of the National Education Policy 2020? That is the thing. Now I go to the second part of my address. I finished this first part, wherein I have talked about the characteristics of a good policy, how the policies are formed, and how can you analyze the current national education policy and identify the strengths and the shortcomings of it. The second part, I would like to familiarize you with the earlier attempts that we have made for policy formulation. And I will not take more than 15-20 minutes because I'm committed to leave this seminar at before 5:30, and that too at the request of Professor Vashi. So in the earlier attempts, let me share with you, because they have put a restriction on me that I will be talking only about higher education and that I would not be permitted to speak on school education. That is their vision, so I will translate their vision. Higher education in this country, you should know, started off from the city of Calcutta. And it was long time ago in 1781 when people of some creditable reputation from the city of Calcutta approached the then Governor General Warren Hastings in 1781, and they asked him to set up schools and colleges. In fact, they literally asked him to come out with a policy of education. And for about 36 years, nothing happened. Their requests were not listened by the then government, and for 36 long years, nothing happened. Then these great leaders of ours from the city of Calcutta whom we must salute today and pay our rich tributes, they decided to set up their own institutions. So they mobilized their own limited resources and they set up the first institution of higher learning in the name of Hindu College in 1817 in the city of Calcutta. This is how the higher education began in our country. And they were emulated by the leaders from the other parts of the country as well. Then we had series of colleges like the Hooghly College, the Elphinstone College, the Pune College, the Patna College, Madras Agra College, Madras Christian College. So large number of colleges were established by our own people because they were very concerned about the education of the children of the country. And the government was not that much concerned. In fact, let me also share one thing very interesting about those institutions. These colleges were not awarding degrees actually. They were awarding only the completion certificates and finishing certificates. And those certificates were good enough to go to the Western world for pursuing higher education. But the higher education was limited only to a very elite group. There was no question of massification of higher education at that point in time because of limited resources and because of the kind of literacy rate that we had. We had only 18% literacy rate when we got independence in 1947. It was in 1854 that Sir Charles Wood, who was the president of the board of control of the company, East India Company, he sent a dispatch to Lord Dalhousie, who was the Governor General here, and that dispatch was the Magna Carta of can be called as the Magna Carta of Indian education. The dispatch asked the government to take up the responsibility of education of the people. And on the basis, in fact, Wood's dispatch, there were about 100 recommendations. Of them, one recommendation was to establish 3 universities in India, in the port cities of Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras. And then after a gap of 3 years, in 1857, they established 3 universities. And these universities were not the centers of teaching and learning, actually. These were the places to test the knowledge imparted through the colleges. So that was the beginning of the modern Indian higher education in our country, 1857. And then these colleges, which were existing prior to 1857, were affiliated with these 3 universities. So they became affiliating universities and they were not having the departments there. In 1882, another commission was established to inquire into the progress of the Wood's dispatch and to suggest measures to carry forward the policy of the Wood's dispatch. So expansion of higher education and rise of colleges which depended wholly on fees, it led to multiple problems. And in 1902, the British government set up a commission to tackle the problems arising out of those complications. Because the internal recoveries were very low, the teachers were not paid adequate salaries, they were finding it extremely difficult to find the teachers to teach. As a result of which, what happened that after 11 years, we came up with the first policy on education in 1913. That was the first policy which we had brought out in modern times. And this was adopted by the government through resolution, like we had adopted 1968 policy through resolution without passing it in the parliament. Calcutta University was the first university to have set up the departments in the university in 1914, because the vice chancellor of the Calcutta University was such a towering man who, despite the opposition from the then government, decided to set up the teaching and research departments in the university. He had to face a lot of resentment from the government, so much so that the government decided to set up a commission to look into the functioning of the Calcutta University. So they set up a Calcutta University Commission after 2 years because he was not listening to the government. He said, what are we having this university for? If the university cannot teach, if the university cannot create new knowledge, then what is the purpose of having the university? So he took a very strong stand, and without caring for the government, he set up the departments, and the teachers also came forward and said that they were ready to pay, that they were ready to teach without the salaries actually. They said that if the government is not going to pay the salary, then we would not mind, we will teach without money. Then we got independence in 1947, and the first commission which we had decided was, which we had set up was the Radhakrishnan Commission, which is also known as University Education Commission in 1948. But 4 years after, we set up another commission which is known as Mudaliar Commission. I am not going to go into the details of those commissions. In 1964, we realized that we cannot look at education in a disjointed manner. We have to look at it in a holistic manner. And if we have to look at it in a holistic manner, then there is not, then we should not be looking at university education separately and school education separately. So the Kothari Commission was set up in 1964. And the exercise that was undertaken by Kothari Commission has remained unparalleled until this day. And when I was talking about the approaches to policy formulation, and I said that you find answers to the questions based on empirical evidences, that is what was done, that was done by Kothari Commission. Number of research studies were commissioned in school education, in higher education, in technical education, and based on the findings of those research studies, the recommendations were made. So they were in sync with the then ground realities of the country. And the inputs provided by Kothari Commission, the report was submitted to the federal government in 1966. We had formulated the policy in 1968. So the advantage of developing the policy in 1968 was that we had answers to our problems based on empirical evidences, and on the basis of which we formulated the National Education Policy in 1968, which was adopted through a government resolution. Many people say that it was not passed by the parliament. It's not necessary to pass the policy in the parliament. We have not passed even this policy into the parliament. Then we can hold discussion in the parliament, and that is what was planned even for this policy. But I think because of some other exigency, the parliament was adjourned sine die, and we could not hold discussion on the national education policy towards the end of the last session of the parliament. We brought out another policy in 1986. But prior to bringing out the 1986 policy also, we came up with a policy perspective document actually, which was Challenge of Education, a policy perspective, which you can see as a forerunner to the national policy on education of 1986. This document was brought out in 1985. Lot of work was done prior to the development of the NP 1986. The National Policy on Education 1986 was re-examined in 1990, as I had said earlier, by Acharya Ramamurthy Committee. And in 1992, we came up with the revised version of the National Education Policy of 1986. If you see the document, that is also a 50-page report with the modified version of the National Education Policy 1992. We made very little modifications actually. Most of the recommendations made in the National Policy on Education 1986 were retained. And in 1992, though, we came up with another document which is known as Towards an Enlightened and Humane Society, wherein we had addressed the concerns of all the sectors of education. After that, we set up several committees and commissions from time to time. For instance, in 2005, we set up the National Knowledge Commission under the chairmanship of Dr. Sam Pitroda. And then we set up the Yashpal Committee on renovation and rejuvenation of higher education. And if you go through these two documents, insofar as the higher education sector is concerned, you will find that most of the recommendations made in these two documents are overlapping. They had made recommendations about having an overarching mechanism in the form of the Inter-Regulatory Higher Education Authority, which we have recommended in our present National Education Policy of 2020. So the basis of earlier policies, let me recapitulate it, that if you look at the basis of earlier policies, the 1913 policy was brought out through government resolution. 1968 policy was also through government resolution, but it was based on the outcomes of the research-based recommendations made by Kothari Commission in 1966. 1986 policy was based on candid analysis through a document called Challenges of Education, a Policy Perspective. And insofar as this policy is concerned, I'm now at the last leg of this talk. In this section, I'm going to talk about the National Education Policy 2020. The initial work on this policy started off in 2014 when the Ministry of Human Resource Development brought out a concept note identifying 33 different subjects. Of them, 13 were pertaining to school education and 20 were pertaining to higher education. This concept note was circulated amongst the people, and the national level resource institutions were asked to file their submissions to the government on those specific topics which were identified. For instance, there were 20 such subjects in the sector of higher education. So we were asked to file the submissions on those 20 different aspects of higher education. The discourses were organized by the government at different levels, and the material which was developed through these discourses, through the submissions made by the national level institutions, that material was made available to a 4-member committee headed by the former Cabinet Secretary, Mr. T.S.R. Subramaniam. And this committee was asked to develop the draft of the National Education Policy. The T.S.R. Subramaniam Committee submitted its report to the government in August 2016, after a gap of about 2 years. But somehow that report did not find favor with the government, and government decided to set up another committee under the chairmanship of Dr. K. Kasturi Rangan, a very renowned space scientist, the former chairman of Indian Space Research Organization. And that committee was constituted in June 2017, wherein our friend and colleague Dr. Katimani was also one of the members. This committee, Kasturi Rangan Committee, submitted its 477-page report on December 15, 2018. This report was put in the public domain by the Ministry of Human Resource Development, and they invited comments and suggestions within August 2019. MHRD then brought out a condensed version in 55 pages, which was made available to the people in October 2019. This present form of the National Education Policy, which consists of 63 pages, it was formally cleared by the Cabinet on 26 July 2020. And if you look at the vision of this policy, it says that the purpose of education has to develop good human beings capable of rational thought and action, possessing compassion and empathy and all that. And that Bharat is going to be a Vishwaguru, promoting flexibility and equity, all those kinds of things, and transforming Bharat sustainably into an equitable and vibrant knowledge society by providing access to high quality education to all. The current policy has made a number of structural changes, has recommended, sorry, not change, made. The current policy has recommended a number of structural changes both in school education sector and in higher education sector. I will only sum up those quickly within another 3-4 minutes. For instance, in school education, instead of having 10+2 pattern of school education, we will have now 5 years of foundational stage. We have added 3 more years in the formal system of lower primary education, which we have today. And then another 3 years of preparatory stage, comprising grades 3 to 5 of the children are in the age cohort of 8 to 11. And then we will have middle stage, grades 6 through 8, and the age cohort of 11 to 14. And then the secondary stage consisting of grades 9 through 12 and age cohort of 14 to 18. We have committed that we are going to provide universal access to early childhood and care education from age 3 to 5, and that we will have the national curriculum framework for different age groups insofar as school education is concerned, and that universal foundational literacy and numeracy we will attain by 2025. We have laid down certain goals, and that vocational education will also commence from grade 6 onwards, and that we will have a 4-year integrated teacher education program. In higher education, by and large, what we have said that we are going to have 3 types of institutions now. We will have research intensive universities. We will have teaching intensive universities, which can also undertake research in limited areas of specialization. And we will have autonomous colleges with degree granting powers. So we'll have only 3 sets of institutions according to the recommendations of the new national education policy. We have also said that the undergraduate program is going to be of 4-year duration with multiple exit options. Some students can leave after the completion of 1 year with a certificate, after 2 years with a diploma, after 3 years with a bachelor's degree, and after 4 years with a bachelor's degree with research. We have also, the policy has also recommended the differential entry-level qualifications for the PhD programs. Policy has recommended that we will have the National Research Foundation for the purposes of supporting research, and that we will have academic bank of credits. The students can earn credits from different institutions, and for the purposes of awarding degree, the parent organization will take into account the credits earned from another institution. It has also talked about this establishment of the model educational research universities, multidisciplinary educational research university known as MERU. It has talked about the internationalization of higher education. Insofar as financing is concerned, policy has reiterated the recommendation made by Kothari Commission in 1966 that we are going to spend 6% of the GDP on education. It has talked about the curbing of commercialization of education, and it has recommended altogether a different regulatory mechanism that we will have tight but tight and light regulatory mechanism. We will have only one overarching regulatory body known as Higher Education Commission of India with 4 verticals. And these 4 verticals are going to be the councils like the National Accreditation Council, like Higher Education Grants Council, like General Education Council, and what is the 4th one? I'm missing it. National Higher Education Regulatory Council, National Higher Education Grants Council, National Accreditation Council, and General Education Council. So these 4 verticals will be there, and the overall arching body will be the Higher Education Commission of India. Policy has also talked about effective governance through Board of Governors, that each institution will be having a Board of Governors, and these Board of Governors will be squarely responsible for steering the affairs of the individual institution. So these are some of the highlights which we will be discussing in greater detail in subsequent lectures. But this is what I thought that in the next, today I would be talking only about the concept of the policy, characteristics of good policy, how can we analyze the policy, what are the approaches of policy formulation, and what were the bases of the earlier policies that we had brought out, and what has gone into the formulation of the National Education Policy 2020, and what are some of the highlights of the current National Education Policy.
Participants will take a break of 5 minutes and I'll start the session 2 video. Participants will start with the session 2 video.
What I propose to do is that I'm going to talk in brief about the higher education. How have we envisioned higher education in the new National Education Policy 2020? And I'm given that I would pick up the significant recommendations and reflect on the implications of those recommendations. So my focus is going to be on major recommendations and the implications of those recommendations. There are a couple of recommendations about the structural changes in higher education, the program changes. There are certain targets which the policy has set for us to realize in the next 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years. Then the types of institutions, and apart from that, the massification of higher education. What is the goal that we have set for ourselves, and how are we going to consolidate the institutions which are operating at a very low level. So these are some of the major points which I'm going to reflect upon. I would begin with making this assertion once again that the policy has reiterated several earlier recommendations spanning over a period of 7 decades, because the policy formulators have realized that those recommendations which were made in 1948-49 and have not been implemented are still as much relevant in the present context as they were there during 48 and 49, and which is why they seem to have reiterated those recommendations. Policy has laid greater emphasis about moving universities and colleges towards multidisciplinary universities and colleges. They have said that we should have at least one multidisciplinary institution of higher learning in each district or near every district. We have a large number of multidisciplinary institutions, but we also have some single faculty institutions, and I think probably they were driven by that kind of the position and made this recommendation that all institutions must be multidisciplinary institutions of higher learning. They have said that the target with regard to this is 2030, that all higher educational institutions have to plan to become a multi-faculty, multidisciplinary institution by 2030. And that by 2040, it means that they have to develop the institutional development plan. Each institution has to develop the institution development plan, that is IDP, by 2030, and by 2040 they would certainly transform themselves from the present status to the multidisciplinary institution of higher learning. It's a very welcome move, and I think each one of us must appreciate that. But what does it mean actually? If you look at the implication of this kind of a recommendation, we have about 993 universities in this country and or 39,000 odd colleges. And apart from that, there are also about 11,000 stand-alone institutions which are offering the certificate program and the diploma program in the post-secondary sector. So it's a very large system of higher education. But when you are making such a recommendation that all institutions will have to transform themselves by 2040 into multidisciplinary institution, then it will have two implications. One implication is that either you close down all single faculty institutions, or you upgrade them into multidisciplinary institutions. So if you are going to shut down the single faculty institutions, then it will have a lot of implications. It would require enormous amount of political will, because some of the institutions are managed by the politicians. And apart from that, and if you transform all these, 40,000 odd colleges and a large number of universities and standalone institutions into multi-faculty, then it requires greater amount of, substantial amount of earmark resources, which seem highly unlikely actually. So the idea of another implication is, like we have done in the state of Andhra Pradesh, that we set up a university in each district, and as a result of which, that has not been a very good experience. And I think we need to draw some lessons out of Andhra Pradesh experience. The idea of having one higher educational institution in or near every district by 2030, it doesn't seem to be a credible recommendation according to me, because it is going to accelerate the inbreeding on the campuses. We already are suffering from that. And it is going to promote parochialism actually, which will cut into the concept of pluralism, which provides inherent strength to an institution. University, the definition of a university is that it is a place where universal knowledge exists, and that it should have a universal character, and that it should follow 5 principles of pluralism. Pluralism in terms of curricular provisions, pluralism in terms of faculty recruitment, pluralism in terms of students enrollment, and pluralism in terms of pursuing research. We may be having a design and methodology and tools and instruments and methods of statistical methods of analysis. But if everyone is going to use the same design and same methodology and same set of sample and similar kind of statistical analysis, then we will become, a laughing stock. And the last one is about the mobilization of resources. If all the institutions will keep looking towards the state governments or the central government, and if the faculty members are not going to use their scholarship for the purposes of mobilizing resources from other agencies, then we will not be able to becoming a vibrant institution of higher learning. And that is not possible actually if you are going to have a university or a higher educational institution in each district. It cuts into the concept of a university. It also cuts into the concept of the pluralism, which is extremely essential for any institution of higher learning to becoming a vibrant institution. Then the policy has recommended that we will have 3 types of institutions: research-intensive universities, teaching-intensive universities, and autonomous colleges with degree-granting powers, primarily focusing on undergraduate programs. Policy has also said that these degree-granting autonomous colleges can also evolve as a university over a period of time. Now, a university, as I had said earlier, will mean a multidisciplinary institution of higher learning which offers undergraduate, graduate, and research programs with high quality teaching and research and community engagement. But since teaching and research have a symbiotic relationship, so classification of universities on the basis of teaching and research, it doesn't sound well, and again, it does not cut into the very concept of a university. What will happen that some universities are going to ignore teaching because they will be focusing more on research. We already have some universities which are offering only the postgraduate programs and the research programs. They are not having undergraduate programs. And if at all they have, the number of the undergraduate program is very, very small. And whenever you take up the issue of offering the undergraduate programs in those institutions, there is a lot of resistance from the faculty and the management. And they have this kind of an impression that if they get into the undergraduate programs, it will bring down the quality of the research which they are conducting. This is the general argument that you would like to listen. But if you look at the international institutions of higher learning, which are figuring, in global ranking in the first 50 and first 100, you would find that all of them, most of them, almost all of them, let me say almost all of them are having undergraduate programs, graduate programs, and research programs, actually. And some of the outstanding research scientists at the international level are of the opinion that they get greater ideas by way of interacting with the undergraduate students for two reasons. Number one, that they have a larger pool to interact with, and therefore they get larger ideas. And another one is they think that some of those brilliant students at the undergraduate level, they wither away after some time. Some of them will go for postgraduate programs. Some of them will leave at that stage. So this is one thing. And the another thing is that granting autonomy and degree awarding power to colleges in a way bid goodbye to the affiliating system, which we have been lamenting upon for a very long time, because we had inherited this affiliating system from British when we set up these three universities on the pattern of London University. But London University gave it up in 1858, and we are still continuing with the affiliating system. And we have universities which are having as many as 900 or 1,000 and 1,200 colleges affiliated with it. And most of the time, instead of focusing on research programs, these universities remain busy in managing the colleges which are affiliated with them. But our problem, what would be our problem? We have some very illustrious colleges, actually, because of the historical underpinnings, and because some management are very conscious of the quality, but that number is very small. And therefore, if you are going to convert all the existing colleges into autonomous colleges with degree and give them degree granting powers, what will happen to the equivalence and parity of degrees? This is a very big question, I think. And how are we going to ensure the equivalence and parity of degrees across various colleges? So comparability is going to become a huge issue with its adverse impact on employability. I'm not going to name some of the colleges which are doing exceedingly well and others which are abysmally poor, but this is going to be a very serious issue. So we will have to, one of the implications of this kind of a recommendation is that we will have to make sure about the parity and equivalence of degrees awarded by these colleges. Otherwise, the pass outs of a large number of colleges will feel cheated that they have stayed with an institution for 4-year duration or 6-year duration or 5-year duration. But when they would go into the world of work, and if they are looked at from different perspectives by the prospective employers, then they will feel that as if they are cheated. Now, policy has also made one good recommendation that at undergraduate level, our programs will be multidisciplinary, which will be of either of 3-year duration or 4-year duration with multiple exit options within this period. People are considering it a great recommendation. This is what was done in the University of Delhi. And but look at the and it says that some students can leave with a certificate after 1 year, some students can leave after 2 years with diploma, and some can leave after 3 years with a bachelor's degree, and some can leave after 4 years with a bachelor degree with research. And that is going to be the preferred option according to the recommendation. Now, it also says that higher educational institutions will have freedom to offer different designs of master's program. I mean, those who pass out with 3 years bachelor's with the bachelor's degree of 3 years, should they decide to go in for master's program, for them the universities will have to design a 2-year master's program. While for those who would be completing 4-year bachelor's degree with research, for them, universities will have to design 1-year master's program. This is one implication. Now, there is also a recommendation about 5 years integrated master's program actually. And another recommendation is that the entry to the PhD will be through 2 different channels. One, that a student who graduates with the 4-year degree, bachelor's degree with research, he can or she can go directly for the PhD program. Or those who have another recommendation is that MPhil will be discontinued. Now, look at the implications of these recommendations insofar as the structural changes are concerned. Now, increase in duration to 4 years for the first degree will be a worthwhile idea only if provision of infrastructure, human resource, financial requirements, and curriculum updating along with quality of its transaction can be detailed and assured by both the central government and the state governments, because it is going to have substantial financial implications. So making recommendation is one, but translating that recommendation into reality is far more important. And it is this recommendation, though a worthwhile recommendation, but it is going to have very serious implications insofar as these financial resources are concerned, and we'll have to work on that. Now, introduction of a 4-year liberal education will certainly provide students broad knowledge of the wider world, along with an in-depth study in a specific domain of knowledge. But this recommendation was also made by Kothari Commission in 1964-66. But this would require greater academic preparation with open consultation with the academia. The multiple exit option within this period will have serious consequences on 2 different counts. And the onus would lie on us as teachers. Number 1, it would require designing of curricular and transactional procedures in such a manner that it guarantees the culmination of competencies and skills for those who would be seeking an exit with a certificate or a diploma. And on the other hand, it ensures acquisition of the prerequisites for those who would like to pursue their bachelor's program in the 3rd year and subsequently in the 4th year. So this is going to be a Herculean task actually, and the teachers will have to. It's a doable proposition. I'm not saying that it cannot be done, but it requires a different kind of scholarship. It would require different kind of classroom processes, because 40 students are going to join the class in the first year, and of them 10 are going to leave after first year with a certificate. And for them the program has to be such that for them the competencies, I mean, they should acquire the competencies and the skills which would essentially be expected of a one year student, and similarly from a student who completes 2 years with us. And at the same time, those who would be moving forward, for them, how are we going to ensure that they also possess, along with them, they also possess those competencies and the skills which would become the prerequisites for the courses that we are going to transact in the third year and fourth year. This is going to be a very serious academic exercise. Secondly, this recommendation is going to hurt hard the private institutions which solely depend on internal recoveries, as they will have to have full contingent of faculty and necessary infrastructure depending upon the initial intake. If the initial intake is going to be 40, then they will have to have the necessary infrastructure and the number of faculty members who can manage a class of 40 students. But if in the fourth year, if they find that only 10 students are left out of 40, then how are they going to manage their affairs, because they are not getting any financial assistance from the other sources? They depend primarily on internal recoveries, and that too will be hard for them, because they will have to compete with other private institutions. It would be more sensible, in fact, to make optimum use of limited resources on existing institutions which have potential for research, rather than sprinkling them thinly. University system in this country, as I had said earlier also, has been sidestepped in preference to some premier institutions. And therefore, the government will have to support the private institutions if they want everyone to implement this recommendation. Discontinuation of the MPhil program is a good idea, but master's degree or a 4-year bachelor's degree with research as the direct entry into a PhD program is going to be a risky proposition. If you look at the profile of our existing undergraduate programs, universities and colleges which are offering those programs, you have very few institutions which have the capacity of preparing a research-ready student at the undergraduate level. You can't have a research-ready student unless your curricular provision provides for participation in research by every single student. And therefore, we'll have to update our existing curriculum with a view to ensuring that every single student gets an opportunity to participate in research. Only then you can make them research ready. If you see, I mean, the quality of institutions that we have, you will find very few, handful of institutions which will pass this criteria. So what we can do is that we can attempt it on select basis in places where curricular provisions and its transactions provide for meaningful participation of every student in research. Role of master's degree may be obviated only by enriching the PhD program with mandatory comprehensive coursework and rigorous assessment. Like University Grants Commission had introduced the pre-PhD course when it amended the regulation for MPhil and PhD program. The another one is that each higher educational institution has to develop the IDP, which is known as Institutional Development Plan, which would require greater hand holding. People do not have expertise in developing the perspective plan, and which is why you move from one university to another university or college, one college to another college. You will not find the perspective plan in any institution. If there are any, that number might be very, very tiny. The policy has also recommended about that they are going to establish academic bank of credit, which would digitally store credits earned from various higher educational institutions. So this would, what is the implication of this? The implication of it would be that I sign a program in Hansraj College, for instance, or in Jamia Millia Islamia. And if my bachelor's program is of 132 credits, I look around and take 30 credits from a sister institution. I go to Ambedkar University in Delhi, or I go to somewhere else. I go to, to other state, and on those 30 credits from there. Now, if you give that kind of a freedom, how, and if the college, if someone decides to earn those credits from a smaller institution wherein the tuition fee is less, then the university should be ready to accept those grades, because it is ultimately the degree would be awarded by the university, and it would be the question of the prestige of the university. So it would require some kind of an internal arrangement. Institutions will have to sign memorandum of understanding with different institutions where from they can accept their credits and where from they cannot accept their credits. This is what we have picked up from the United States of America. There, if the student is enrolled with the University of California at Berkeley, the student will earn 10, 15, or 20 credits from a community college. But then they have identified that the credits earned only from those community colleges will be accepted by the University of Berkeley in California. So it is going to have a lot of implication, and for which we will have to make necessary preparation. There is a persistent concern to increasing the not started, but after independence, the gross enrollment ratio in higher education, for the first time when it was computed in 60-61, we had only 1.5% gross enrollment ratio, which means that in the age cohort of 18 to 23 years, only 1.5 students were going for higher education. Today, that number has reached to 26.7%. So we have traversed a long distance. But what we have recommended, one of the recommendations is that we will achieve 50% gross enrollment ratio in the age cohort of 18 to 23 by 2030, which means that we will have to double the enrollment figures. Now we have 3.7 crores children enrolled in higher education. That number is going to be around 7 crore. But if equity and quality do not go hand in hand, it will further widen inequalities in the society. And laying greater emphasis on the gross enrollment ratio would alone not mean giving a flip to the gross domestic product, actually. A large number of middle class population is financially stressed and cannot seek services beyond government institutions. If they go to private institutions, they find them very expensive. So significant spike in gross enrollment ratio would warrant increase in number of scholarships both in public and private institutions. This would be yet another implication of this kind of a recommendation. University Grants Commission is awarding about 88,000 scholarships a year. I think that number has to be multiplied 4 times or 5 times should we decide, I mean, if we aim at achieving 50% gross enrollment ratio in higher education. So, but we should also realize that there's an alarming fall in returns to education. You will find that in certain institutions, the enrollments are declining in the recent past. Though, I mean, we have this kind of a practice that enrollment continues to take a dip at each level in our country. From nearly 100% student enrollment at primary level, it plummets to 72% at upper primary level, 52% at secondary level, 43% at higher secondary level. And by the time it reaches to post-secondary sector, it remains only 26.5 or 26.7%. The National Statistical Office also reports, the reports of the National Statistical Office also clearly indicates decline in enrollment between 2014 and 2018. So it might be safely attributed as much a function of poor quality education and lack of interest and sharply falling returns to education, because the students are not getting gainful employment, as a result of which the students are not coming in large number in our higher educational institutions. Policy has also underlined the significance of the open and distance learning by stating that all types of institutions could offer ODL programs provided they are accredited to do so. So they have put up a qualifier actually, that every institution can do it provided it is accredited to offer the open and distance learning program. Blended approach is the real solution, but too much of dependence on ODL to increase the gross enrollment ratio should not lead further dilution of standards. And now we have come up again with the 100% online program. So we are going to have 3 different modes of teaching and learning in higher education sector. One is face-to-face, another is the continuation of the ODL program, which we had started in mid-60s. And we have now 14 open universities, including National Indira Gandhi National Open University, and another 86 universities which are offering the ODL programs. But one thing which we will have to do insofar as the ODL programs and the online programs are concerned, that we will have to address the issue of perceived notion of the disputed equivalence between the ODL and the formal face-to-face system. We'll have to take abundant precaution in designing and developing study learning material and correspondingly the assessment procedures. Now, regulating and accrediting agencies will also have to apply rigorous measures to ensure the quality of both the material and the product. I hope that Dr. Vimal Dar will be talking to you about the learning management system, about the quality of MOOCs, and about the editing of the lectures, putting simulations and animations to make the lectures more interesting. Policy has also taken note of the regional imbalances that we have in terms of institutional density. We have pockets in this country wherein the institutional density per 100,000 population is as high as 50 or 51, 52, 49 in states like Andhra Pradesh, in states like Karnataka, in states like Maharashtra. But we also have states like Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, wherein the institutional density per 100,000 population is less than 10. So, and it varies actually from state to state. So policy has emphasized the need for enhancing access by building more institutions in special educational zones containing large number of unrepresented groups, which is a very welcome move. This is the issue which requires to be addressed on priority basis actually. Otherwise, the different states will continue to remain at different stages of development. I mean, this was primarily, precisely the reason in 1976 that the education was brought onto the concurrent list, when it was realized that some states are languishing in poverty, some states are very, very backward, some states are better off, and then it was decided that let us have education onto the concurrent list, which means meaningful partnership between the central government and the state government. And then the central government started providing interventions right from the primary level up to the higher education level. So another problem which has been noticed by the policy is about the consolidation of smaller institutions. You go to the National Council for Teacher Education, take 2 units and have 120 students in Bachelor's of Education program. So the policy has recommended that we must consolidate because 20% of the institutions in our country are having less than 120 students. So we'll have to consolidate or a smaller number of institutions across 3 types of institutions that have been envisioned in the policy. And it has said that a college should have a minimum of 2,000 students and maximum of 5,000, and similarly a university should have a minimum of 5,000 and maximum of 25,000. Maybe it has been left out as there will be great difficulty in implementation of this recommendation as reducing over. I mean, this was stated in the draft policy, but I did not find it in the final version. Maybe, I mean, they would have realized that it would be very difficult to implement it. So this is all. I would like to stop because my time is up. I have not been able to touch upon the research, the internationalization of higher education, and about the regulatory provisions on which several recommendations have been made in the policy. Maybe I will cover them in my next lecture.
Dear participants, our second session is also over. It's my pleasure now to propose a vote of thanks. On behalf of Tilak College of Science and Commerce, Vashi, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you for gracing us with your presence today. It has been an absolute privilege to have you join us for this 1-week online faculty development program. First and foremost, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to our distinguished guests, Dr. Rajendra Kumar Joshi sir and Dr. Ved Prakash sir, for their insightful and inspiring words that have truly enriched our gathering and provided us with valuable perspectives. We are grateful for your presence and the wisdom you have shared with us today. I would also like to express our sincere gratitude to our Tilak Education Society's chairman, Sri Jain Kurup sir, directors, Dr. Sri Ajit Kurup sir and Dr. Sri Arun Kurup sir. I extend my sincere thanks to our principal madam, Dr. Anida Joshi, who always guiding us and giving us strength. My gratitude also goes to Registrar Suresh Pulle sir and Administrator Anil Nair sir for their continuous support and encouragement to carry out this program successfully. Furthermore, I extend our gratitude to all the participants who have joined us today. Your presence has added vibrancy and energy to this gathering. Your active participation, engagement, and enthusiasm have made this event a really memorable and enriching experience for all. I hope that we will meet again tomorrow for our last session. Thank you all once again.